Princess Amara sat quietly in her chambers, staring out the window. The bright red sky of her home planet filled her view, but it couldn't take away the heavy feeling in her heart. Soon, she would have to marry a human. The idea made her stomach turn. Amara had heard stories about humans. They were known for being ruthless, cold-hearted, and fierce warriors. She had never met one, but the rumors made her fear them. They were strong, violent, and unstoppable in battle. Her people, the Andari, had always seen humans as dangerous, even terrifying. Her father, the king, had arranged the marriage as a way to bring peace between their two worlds. But peace wasn't what Amara wanted. She didn't want to marry a warrior who might hurt her. Her family had told her that the human prince, Caleb, was coming to their palace in just a few days. They said he would be different from the others, that he would be a good match for her. But Amara couldn't shake her fear. How could a human be anything but ruthless? Everything she knew about humans told her they were violent and unkind. She had heard the stories. Humans killed for fun, they burned villages, and they never showed mercy. Amara was a princess, but she didn't feel powerful in this moment. She felt small. She paced across the room, her mind racing. She had no choice in the matter. Her marriage was meant to bring peace to the galaxy, but that didn't make her feel better. She was about to marry someone she feared. Would he be cruel to her? Would he hurt her, just like the humans in the stories? Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. She turned quickly, wiping away the tears she didn't realize had fallen down her cheek. "Enter," she called, trying to sound brave. Her personal maid, Lyra, stepped in. Lyra smiled softly but could see the worry in Amara's eyes. "Your Highness, your father wishes to speak with you," Lyra said. Amara nodded, though she didn't feel like seeing anyone. She wished she could hide away forever, away from the marriage, and away from the human prince. "I'll be there soon," she replied quietly. Lyra hesitated for a moment, then spoke gently. "Your Highness, I know you are worried, but perhaps the human prince will not be as you imagine. He may not be like the others." Amara didn't answer at first. Lyra had always been kind to her, but no one could understand the fear she felt. "I have heard so much about them. About how they kill, how they take what they want without mercy," Amara said, her voice trembling. Lyra walked closer, her expression serious but kind. "Not all humans are like that. I have heard some stories of them showing kindness too." Amara shook her head. "I don't believe it. How can they be kind? They are nothing like us. My father says it is necessary for peace, but peace doesn't matter if I'm marrying someone who might hurt me." Lyra didn't say anything more. She simply bowed her head and left the room, leaving Amara to her thoughts. Alone again, Amara walked to the window and looked out at the distant stars. She could almost see the ships arriving. She knew Caleb's ship would be among them. Her father, King Zurich, had promised her that Caleb would be a great man, a warrior who could protect their planet and ensure peace. But Amara couldn't imagine ever trusting a human, not after everything she had been told. The next morning, the palace was buzzing with excitement. Caleb, the human prince, would arrive soon. Amara could hear the noise in the halls, the servants running around preparing for his arrival. They were all so eager, so hopeful. They thought this marriage would change everything. But Amara wasn't hopeful. She was scared. As she dressed for the arrival ceremony, Amara tried to focus on her duties as a princess. She tried to forget her fear and think about the future, but it was hard. Every time she thought about the human prince, her heart raced with nervousness. Finally, the moment came. Amara stood at the top of the grand staircase, looking down at the doors that would open to reveal Caleb. She could hear the sound of the crowd gathering below, the excitement in the air. When the doors opened, she would have to meet him. Amara took a deep breath and stepped forward. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest. This was it. This was the moment she had been dreading. She knew she couldn't back out now, but her mind was filled with fear and doubt. What if he was everything the story said? What if she was making a terrible mistake? She took one more deep breath and slowly walked down the stairs, each step feeling heavier than the last. The doors opened. Amara looked up. There, standing in front of her, was a tall, strong-looking human. He wore armor, but his face was calm, not angry or cruel as she had imagined. His eyes met hers, and for a moment, the fear in her heart began to fade, but only for a moment. The ruthless human. Princess Amara stood at the top of the grand staircase, watching the human warrior who had just entered her palace. The heavy doors had opened, and he had stepped inside with the strength of a man who had seen many battles. He was tall, dressed in dark armor, his eyes cold and hard like the steel he wore. His name was Caleb, and he was the one she had been forced to marry. Amara's heart skipped a beat as she stared at him. He looked nothing like the men of her people. His strong face showed no kindness, no warmth. The rumors were true, she thought. He was everything she had feared. Caleb stood in the center of the room, his eyes scanning the alien palace. His expression remained serious, as if he was just here to do his duty, not to care about the ceremony. To him, this marriage was just a political arrangement. He had no interest in a princess, especially one from a different world. But his task was clear. He had to marry her to bring peace to both their peoples. Amara felt her throat tighten. She could see the power in him. His muscles were strong, his posture commanding. He was the kind of man who could easily break someone, and that thought made her stomach turn. How could she marry someone like this? How could she trust him? Her father, King Zarek, stepped forward and greeted Caleb with a firm handshake. "Welcome, Prince Caleb. It is an honor to have you here. We are excited for the future of our two worlds." Caleb gave a short nod, his voice steady and cold. "The honor is mine, King Zarek. I hope this alliance brings the peace we all need." Amara watched them closely. Caleb didn't show any warmth or emotion. His voice was calm, but there was no kindness in it. He was here for one reason only, to fulfill his duty. Amara had expected it, but seeing it in person still hurt. She had imagined that maybe, just maybe, there would be something different about him. But now, standing in front of him, all she saw was the ruthless warrior everyone had warned her about. The ceremony began, and Amara tried to stand tall, hiding the fear inside her. Caleb walked beside her, his step steady and confident. He was calm, too calm, as if nothing about this moment mattered to him. The two of them were supposed to walk together toward the altar, but to Amara, it felt like she was walking toward her doom. She glanced at him once more. His eyes were fixed ahead, his jaw set in a way that made him look unapproachable. He didn't even seem to notice her. To him, she was just part of the mission, another piece in a puzzle he had to solve. There was no warmth in his gaze, no sense of tenderness, just cold determination. They reached the altar, and Amara stood next to him, her hands trembling slightly. She could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on them. The weight of the ceremony was heavy on her shoulders, and she felt more alone than ever. Her thoughts raced. Could she really marry this man? Could she live with someone who seemed so distant, so unfeeling? How could she trust him when all she saw was a soldier, a warrior with no heart? The priest began to speak, but Amara couldn't focus on his words. Her mind was filled with doubts. Caleb's reputation as a ruthless warrior was well known. He had led battles across many planets, crushing enemies without mercy. He was feared, respected, and never shown to be kind or gentle. To her, he was like the stories she had heard, unstoppable and cold. Could anyone like him really care for her? Could someone who had fought in so many wars ever truly understand her? As the ceremony continued, Amara felt her heart grow heavier. She was about to marry someone who might not even care about her. He wasn't here for love. He wasn't here for her. He was here because it was a mission. This union was simply a tool for peace, a way to keep the humans and the Andari from fighting again. Nothing more. Finally, the ceremony came to an end, and Amara could barely hear the words as they spoke their vows. She had only one thought in her mind. This was the man she would marry, the man she would live with for the rest of her life. When the priest said, "You may kiss the bride," Amara felt a wave of panic rise in her chest. What would this kiss be like? Would it be cold and emotionless like everything else Caleb had shown her? Would he even want to kiss her? Caleb turned to her, his hand gently taking hers, but his expression was still distant. He leaned in, and for a brief moment, their lips met. It was a quick, almost robotic kiss. No passion, no warmth, just a formality. It wasn't the kind of kiss Amara had imagined for her wedding day. It was nothing like the love stories she had read about. As they pulled apart, Amara's heart sank. She looked up at Caleb, trying to find something, anything, behind his cold eyes. But there was nothing. He didn't seem to care, didn't seem to feel anything. It was as if the kiss had meant nothing to him. The room erupted in applause, but Amara's mind was far away. She had just married a man she couldn't understand, a man she was scared of, a man who might never show her the kindness and warmth she dreamed of. The human prince, Caleb, was as ruthless as everyone had said. Their first meeting. Princess Amara stood nervously in the grand hall, her heart racing. It was the day she was supposed to meet Caleb, the human warrior she had been forced to marry. She had heard so much about him already. Stories of his ruthless victories, his cold eyes, and the way he led armies without hesitation. The rumors had filled her mind for weeks, making her nervous about the man she was about to meet. Was he really as scary as everyone said? She smoothed down her gown and took a deep breath. The doors to the hall creaked open, and in walked Caleb, the man she had been dreading to see. Her gaze met his, and for a moment, everything in the room seemed to fade away. He stood tall, dressed in armor that gleamed under the palace lights. His face was serious, his eyes cold. He had the look of someone who had fought in many battles. He was just as fierce as the stories had made him seem. Amara's stomach twisted. She had imagined this moment so many times, but nothing could have prepared her for the reality. She had expected him to be fierce, but up close, he seemed even more intimidating. His presence filled the room. He was so different from the gentle and kind men she had imagined. He didn't look like someone who could show affection or tenderness. To her, he looked like a warrior, nothing more. Caleb's eyes scanned the room briefly, and then he turned to her, his expression still unreadable. Amara quickly lowered her gaze, not wanting him to see how nervous she was. She didn't know how to speak to him. What could she say to a man who seemed so far away from everything she knew? "Princess Amara," Caleb said, his voice deep and calm. His tone didn't have the warmth she expected, but it wasn't cold either. It was simply businesslike, as if they were two people doing a job they didn't want to do. Amara nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Prince Caleb." There was a long silence between them. Amara wasn't sure what to say next. Caleb didn't seem to be in any hurry to speak either. He just stood there, waiting for something. She felt like she was trapped in a dream where she couldn't move or say the right words. Finally, Caleb took a step closer, breaking the awkward silence. "I know this is a lot for you," he said, his eyes softening just for a moment. "And I know you're scared. But we both have a role to play in this marriage. We'll make it work." His words surprised Amara. They weren't harsh or rude like she had expected. He wasn't asking for her to love him, but he seemed to understand the situation more than she had thought. He wasn't as cruel as the rumors had painted him. At least, not yet. But that didn't change how she felt. Her heart still beat fast in her chest, and she could still feel the fear in the pit of her stomach. How could she trust him? How could she trust anyone who was from a world so different from her own? She had grown up in a palace filled with kindness and warmth. Caleb's world seemed so cold, so full of battles and warriors. How could someone like him understand her world? "I don't want this," Amara said, her voice shaking. "I don't want to be here, in this marriage. I don't want to be married to someone I don't even know." Caleb's expression remained serious, but he seemed to understand. I know this isn't easy for you, he said again. But we don't have a choice. Our worlds are at war, and this is the only way to stop it. His words were calm, but there was a hint of sadness in his voice. Amara looked up at him again, studying his face closely. For the first time, she saw a flicker of something in his eyes, something that wasn't cold or harsh. It was a brief moment, but it was enough to make her think. Maybe he wasn't as heartless as she had believed. Maybe, just maybe, he was just as trapped in this marriage as she was. I don't understand, Amara said quietly, almost to herself. I don't understand how you can be so calm about this, how you can accept a marriage that's been forced upon you. Caleb took another step forward, his gaze softening. I don't like it either. I never wanted this, but sometimes we have to do things we don't want to for the greater good. I've led armies, fought in battles, and made tough decisions, but I'm not a monster, princess. I'm just a man who has to do what's necessary. Amara didn't know what to say to that. She felt a knot form in her chest as she looked into his eyes. For a moment, she saw the pain behind them. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make her feel like there was something more to Caleb than just the rumors. Maybe he wasn't as ruthless as everyone said. Maybe, like her, he was just trying to survive in a world where peace felt impossible. The silence stretched between them again. This time, it didn't feel as heavy. They weren't enemies anymore, at least not in that moment. They were two people caught in a situation neither of them wanted. I don't know if I can trust you, Amara said softly, her voice filled with uncertainty. Caleb nodded. I don't expect you to trust me yet, but I'll do my best to prove that I'm not your enemy. Amara looked at him for a long moment, her thoughts spinning. She didn't know if she could ever trust him, but for the first time since meeting him, she felt a small flicker of hope. Maybe he wasn't as ruthless as she had thought. Maybe, just maybe, there was more to Caleb than just the warrior he had been made out to be. A soft sighed. Princess Amara paced nervously in her chamber, her mind racing. The conversation with Caleb earlier had left her more confused than ever. She had expected the human prince to be cold and distant, but something had changed. Something in his eyes, the way his voice softened when he spoke to her. It was different from the warrior she had imagined. Maybe, just maybe, Caleb wasn't the monster everyone said he was. But could she trust that? Could she really believe that he was more than just the ruthless, cold soldier who had fought in wars for years? It was hard to know. She had only seen him for a few hours, and still he felt like a stranger to her. As she looked out the window, watching the sun set over the horizon, Amara felt the weight of her situation pressing down on her. She had married Caleb to bring peace between their worlds. That was the reason they were together, nothing more. It was hard to imagine a life built on that alone. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. She turned quickly, her heart skipping a beat. It was late, and she hadn't expected anyone to come. When the door opened, she saw Caleb standing there, looking uncertain, almost hesitant. Princess Amara, he said quietly, his deep voice softer than usual. May I speak with you? Amara blinked in surprise. She had expected him to be in the war room, preparing for something else. She didn't expect him to be here, at her door, asking for her attention. But she nodded anyway, stepping aside to let him in. Of course, she said, her voice unsure. Caleb entered the room and looked around briefly before focusing on her. He seemed awkward, like he didn't quite know how to begin. For a moment, they just stood there, facing each other. Amara could feel the tension in the air, but this time, it was different. It wasn't the same tension from before, the kind that made her nervous and afraid. This was something new, something she hadn't expected. It was almost gentle. Are you all right? Caleb asked after a long pause. His voice was soft, almost concerned. You looked troubled earlier. Amara blinked, surprised by his question. She hadn't expected him to care. I'm fine, she said quickly, not sure why she felt the need to brush off his concern. Just tired, I guess. Caleb didn't seem convinced. He took a step closer to her, his eyes watching her closely. "You don't have to lie to me. I know this isn't easy for you." His words caught her off guard. Amara opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. It was as if she were stuck in a dream where this cold, ruthless soldier was showing her a side she hadn't expected. For the first time, she felt like Caleb wasn't just the warrior who fought battles. He was a person, a real person with feelings. "I didn't choose this either," Caleb continued, his voice quieter now. "I didn't want to marry you. I didn't want any of this, but I know we both have our roles to play, and I'll do what I can to make this work, for both of us." Amara couldn't help but stare at him. Was this really Caleb, the man she had been told was heartless? He was standing in front of her, looking as if he genuinely cared about her feelings. His voice was soft, his words sincere. He wasn't the cruel man she had imagined. "I don't know what to think," Amara admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't know what to feel. Everything is so confusing." Caleb nodded, taking another step closer. "I understand. This is new for both of us. But I want to try. I want to understand you, Princess Amara. I want to be someone you can trust." His words made her heart beat faster. Could it be true? Could someone like Caleb really care about her? Or was this just a moment of weakness, a passing kindness that he would forget once the wedding ceremony was over? Amara didn't know. But in that moment, she felt something she hadn't felt since they met: hope. Caleb reached out, his hand gently resting on her arm. The touch was soft, careful. It wasn't the touch of a warrior, but of a man who wanted to comfort. Amara looked up at him, her eyes searching his face for any hint of insincerity. But there was none. He seemed genuine. "You don't have to face this alone," Caleb said softly. "I won't force you into anything. But I will be here, with you. If you need anything, I'll be there." Amara's breath caught in her throat. She had heard many things about Caleb, but none of them had prepared her for this. None of them had prepared her for the kindness she was seeing now. It was strange, unfamiliar, but it was also comforting. "I don't know if I can trust you yet," Amara whispered, her voice barely audible. "But thank you." Caleb gave her a small, understanding smile. "That's all I ask for. Trust takes time." For the first time since they had met, Amara felt a small spark of something that wasn't fear. It was a flicker of hope, of possibility. Maybe Caleb wasn't as ruthless as the stories had painted him to be. Maybe, in time, they could find a way to make this work. As Caleb turned to leave, Amara watched him go, her mind still spinning. But now, for the first time, she felt like she wasn't alone in this strange new world. Maybe, just maybe, Caleb had a soft side after all. Getting to know each other. Princess Amara sat in the royal garden, her fingers gently tracing the edge of a flower. The soft breeze blew through her hair, and for the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of peace. After the conversation with Caleb the night before, something had changed inside her. She wasn't sure what it was, but it felt like a small weight had lifted from her chest. Maybe it was because she wasn't as afraid of him anymore. Maybe it was because he had shown her a side of himself that she hadn't expected. The sounds of footsteps on the gravel path behind her brought Amara out of her thoughts. She turned around to see Caleb walking toward her, a slight smile on his face. He wasn't wearing his armor today, just simple clothes that made him look more like a normal man than a warrior. It was strange, but in a way, it made him seem less intimidating. "Princess," Caleb greeted her, his voice calm. He stopped a few steps away, as if giving her space. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." Amara shook her head, her smile small but genuine. "No, not at all. I'm glad you came." Caleb nodded, his eyes softening slightly. He seemed hesitant, unsure of how to continue, but then he took a deep breath. "I thought, maybe we could talk, get to know each other a little more." The idea of spending more time with Caleb still made Amara nervous, but she wasn't as afraid of him now. The kindness he had shown the night before was still fresh in her mind. It was a side of him she hadn't expected, and it made her curious about who he really was beneath the warrior's armor. Maybe she had been wrong about him. Maybe he was more than just a ruthless soldier. "I think that's a good idea," Amara said, nodding. She stood up from the stone bench and motioned to the garden. "It's a beautiful day, isn't it?" Caleb smiled, his eyes glancing around the garden. "Yes, it is. It's peaceful here." They both fell into a comfortable silence for a moment, the only sound being the soft rustle of leaves in the wind. Amara found herself stealing glances at Caleb, watching how he seemed so different without his armor. He didn't look like a warrior now, just a man trying to navigate a strange situation. She found herself wondering more and more about him. Who was he really? What had made him the person he was today? Finally, Caleb broke the silence. "I know we're both in a difficult position," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "But I want to understand you, Amara. I want to know more about your world, about you." Amara's heart fluttered at the sound of her name on his lips. It wasn't the usual cold way he had spoken to her. It was softer, more personal. She felt a rush of warmth at his words, but also a twinge of fear. What if this was all just a way to make her trust him? What if, in the end, he was just like everyone else who had used her for their own gain? But then she remembered the way he had spoken to her the night before, the softness in his voice, the way he had looked at her like he genuinely cared. Maybe Caleb wasn't like everyone else. Maybe he really did want to understand her. "I don't know what to tell you," Amara said softly. "I've grown up in a world where peace and tradition are everything. My people value family and honor above all else. We've never known war, not like your people. I don't know what it's like to fight in battles or make tough decisions." Caleb listened quietly, his eyes thoughtful. "I can't imagine what that's like," he said after a moment. "I was raised to be a soldier. Everything I know, I learned from the battlefield. I've had to make choices that haunt me, choices I can't undo. But that's the life I was born into." Amara looked at him, her curiosity growing. "But you're more than just a soldier, aren't you? You've been kind to me, in your own way. I never expected that from you." Caleb looked away for a moment, his jaw tightening slightly. "I know what people say about me. I've heard the rumors. But I'm just a man, Amara. I have my own demons, my own regrets, and I don't want to be just the warrior everyone expects me to be." Amara felt a strange sense of understanding in her chest. For a long time, she had only seen Caleb as the ruthless warrior, the man who would do anything to win. But now, she saw something else, a man with feelings, with regrets, someone who was more than just his past. It was a side of him she hadn't expected, and it made her want to know more. "I don't want to be trapped by my role either," Amara said quietly. "I didn't choose this marriage, but now that it's happening, I want to make the best of it. I don't want to be a princess trapped in a world of politics. I want to be something more." Caleb looked at her, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "I think we're more alike than you realize." Amara smiled back, her heart feeling lighter than it had in days. She was starting to see Caleb in a different light, and maybe, just maybe, he was starting to see her in the same way. They were both trapped in roles they hadn't chosen, but they were trying to make the best of it. They were learning about each other, one step at a time. As the conversation continued, Amara found herself laughing at some of Caleb's stories about his childhood. They weren't the stories of a ruthless warrior, but the stories of a young boy who had wanted to do good in the world. Caleb seemed more relaxed now, as if the weight of the armor he had worn for so long had lifted, just for a moment. It wasn't much, but for the first time, Amara felt like she was getting to know the real Caleb. And maybe, just maybe, this marriage wouldn't be as terrible as she had feared. Changing hearts. The days passed slowly for Princess Amara. Every day seemed to blend into the next, filled with meetings, rituals, and small conversations with Caleb. At first, it had been awkward. She had been unsure of him, unsure of everything. But as the days went by, something unexpected was happening. They were starting to understand each other, slowly but surely. Amara still couldn't believe how different Caleb was from what she had expected. When she had first arrived at his palace, she had been terrified of him. The stories her people had told her painted him as a monster, a cold, heartless warrior. But now, after spending more time with him, she saw a different side to Caleb. He wasn't the ruthless man she had been warned about. He was human, with flaws, regrets, and a kindness that she hadn't expected. It was the small things that made her feel this way. The way he listened when she spoke, the way he smiled when she told him something funny, and how he had started to ask about her world, her life. She had expected a man who cared only about war, but instead, she had found someone who cared about her. Today was different, though. Amara could feel it in the air as she walked through the palace halls. It wasn't the usual tense atmosphere of royal business. It felt lighter, as if something had shifted between her and Caleb. They had spent the morning together, walking through the gardens, talking about their worlds, their dreams, and their fears. It felt natural, like they were becoming friends. Maybe even something more. When she entered her chamber that afternoon, she found Caleb waiting for her. He was sitting by the window, looking out over the palace grounds. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in the way he sat, so still, that made her heart race. Caleb. Amara's voice was soft, uncertain. He turned to face her, his eyes meeting hers. For a moment, there was silence between them. Then Caleb stood up, walking toward her with slow, measured steps. There was a look in his eyes, something that had changed since they first met. It was the same softness she had seen before, but now it was deeper. "I've been thinking a lot," Caleb said quietly. "About everything. About us." Amara's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure what to say. Her mind raced, but she simply nodded, waiting for him to continue. "I know this isn't easy," Caleb said, his voice low. "I know I haven't been the man you wanted me to be. But I'm trying. I'm trying to be someone you can trust. Someone you can depend on." Amara felt a lump form in her throat. She hadn't realized how much she needed to hear those words. The pressure, the fear had been building up inside her for so long. But now, Caleb's words were like a balm to her anxious heart. "I didn't ask for this marriage," Caleb continued, his voice steady. "I didn't want it. But I made a promise. I promised to protect you. And I'll keep that promise. But I also want you to know, Amara, that I want more than just duty between us. I want to be someone you can rely on, someone who cares for you." His words hung in the air between them, and Amara felt her heart soften. She had been so afraid of what this marriage would mean for her, so afraid that it would only be about politics, about duty. But now she was starting to believe that there could be more. Maybe Caleb really did care about her. Maybe she could learn to care about him too. Amara took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly as she spoke. I never thought I'd hear you say that," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought this would be just a marriage of convenience, something we had to do. But now I'm not so sure. I'm starting to see that maybe there's more to you than I thought." Caleb's eyes softened as he took a step closer to her. "Amara, I know we're still learning about each other, but I want to get to know you. I want to understand your world, your thoughts, your heart. I don't want to just be the man who signed the marriage contract. I want to be someone who means something to you." Amara felt a warmth spread through her chest. It was strange, this feeling that was slowly growing inside her. It was a mix of hope and uncertainty, but it was also something new, something she hadn't felt in a long time. She had been so focused on her fear, so focused on the life that had been chosen for her, that she hadn't realized what was beginning to change between her and Caleb. "I'm scared," she confessed quietly, her voice barely audible. "I'm scared of what's happening, of what this could mean. But I also want to try. I want to try to understand you, Caleb. I want to see if we can make this work." Caleb reached out, his hand gently resting on hers. "We'll take it one step at a time, Amara. We don't have to figure everything out right now. We'll go at our own pace. For the first time, Amara smiled. It was small, but it felt real. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew that Caleb was no longer just the ruthless soldier in her mind. He was someone she could talk to, someone she could trust. And maybe, just maybe, he could be the person who helped her find a new way forward. As they stood there, their hands still connected, Amara realized that her heart was starting to change. The walls she had built around herself were slowly coming down. It wasn't easy, and it wouldn't happen overnight, but she was starting to believe that this marriage could be more than just an alliance. Maybe it could be the beginning of something real. The wedding. The day of the wedding had arrived, and the palace was filled with a sense of both excitement and nervousness. Princess Amara stood before the grand mirror in her chambers, staring at her reflection. The elegant dress she wore was a rich shade of gold, embroidered with intricate designs that shimmered in the soft light. It was beautiful, but Amara felt a strange unease settling in her chest. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment, and yet she still didn't feel ready. The thought of marrying Caleb was still overwhelming. It wasn't just the wedding itself. It was the reality of what this marriage meant. She wasn't sure if she was doing this for duty or because of the growing feelings she had begun to develop for him. Amara couldn't help but glance out the window. The bright sun hung in the sky, casting a warm glow over the palace grounds. She was about to walk down the aisle and change her life forever. A soft knock on the door brought her back to the present. She turned to see her maid, Lyra, standing in the doorway with a gentle smile. "Your Highness, are you ready?" Lyra asked, her voice full of warmth. Amara nodded slowly. "I think so," she replied, though doubt lingered in her voice. Lyra stepped into the room and adjusted Amara's veil, making sure everything was perfect. "You look beautiful, princess," she said, her tone comforting. "Thank you, Lyra," Amara said, her smile faint. "But I don't know if I feel beautiful. I feel unsure." Lyra's eyes softened with understanding. "It's natural to feel this way, princess. This is a big step, but you have come so far. Look at how much you've grown since you first arrived here. You've found a way to trust him, haven't you?" Amara took a deep breath. Trust. That was the word she kept coming back to. In the beginning, she had feared Caleb, feared what he represented. But as time passed, she had come to see him in a new light. He wasn't just a ruthless warrior. He was a man who had shown her kindness, who had listened to her when she needed someone to talk to. She had started to trust him in ways she hadn't expected. "Yes," Amara finally admitted, her voice stronger now. "I think I have." Lyra smiled brightly, as if pleased with her answer. "Then you're ready, Your Highness. Trust yourself and trust him. You can do this." Amara nodded. She felt the weight of the moment heavy on her shoulders, but there was also a sense of determination growing inside her. She had made it this far. She had come to understand Caleb, and had learned that there was more to him than what people said. Now she had to take the next step, trusting him with her heart. The ceremony was held in the grand hall of the palace, where guests from all over the kingdom had gathered to witness the union of Princess Amara and Caleb, the man she had once feared. The walls were decorated with beautiful flowers, and the air was filled with a sense of excitement. The rich music echoed throughout the hall, adding to the grandness of the occasion. As Amara walked down the aisle, she could feel the eyes of the crowd on her. Her heart beat in her chest, but as she reached the altar, her gaze found Caleb. He was standing tall, his face calm, but there was something different in his eyes, something that made her feel like this wedding wasn't just a formality. This was real. Caleb's eyes softened as she approached. When she reached him, he reached out and took her hand in his. His touch was gentle, reassuring, and Amara couldn't help but feel comforted by it. She could see in his eyes the same nervousness she felt, but also a deep sense of commitment. "Are you okay?" Caleb whispered, his voice low but steady. Amara nodded, her voice trembling slightly. "I think I am." The ceremony began, and though the words of the priest were familiar, They felt different today. As the vows were spoken, Amara's mind wandered, reflecting on how much had changed between her and Caleb. She had started this journey filled with fear, unsure of the man standing before her. But now she saw him as more than just the soldier he appeared to be. He had shown her his kindness, his struggles, and his heart. And for the first time in a long while, Amara felt hope. When it was Caleb's turn to speak, he took a deep breath. "Amara," he began, his voice strong but filled with emotion. "When I first met you, I didn't know what to expect. I thought this would just be a duty, a political marriage. But over time, I've come to see you for who you are. You are brave, kind, and beautiful in ways I never imagined. I promise to protect you, to stand by you, and to never let you feel alone. I will always try to be the man you deserve." Amara felt a tear slip down her cheek, but it wasn't out of sadness. It was from a mix of relief and love that had begun to bloom inside her. She had never thought she would feel this way about the man she had once feared. When it was her turn to speak, Amara took a deep breath and met Caleb's gaze. "Caleb," she began softly, "I didn't choose this marriage, but now that it's happening, I want to try. I want to trust you, and I want us to build something together. I promise to stand by you, to support you, and to always give you my heart, no matter what comes our way." As she finished her vows, Caleb's hand tightened around hers, his grip warm and reassuring. He smiled at her, his eyes shining with something deep and true. The priest pronounced them husband and wife, and the room erupted in applause. Amara and Caleb turned to face the crowd, but all Amara could focus on was the man standing beside her. The man she had once feared, but now knew she could trust. In that moment, she realized that this marriage wasn't just a political contract. It was the beginning of a new journey, one they would take together.